Thank you for coming. It's our first event since the post-pandemic, and I usually tease people who use the words context and dialogue. Yes, you do, because they deserve it. But I think in the context of the last 18 months, it's great to see this dialogue going on. This conversation we're going to have with Brian and Steve, but also all the artists in the gallery, to see their work in one place. At its heart, my greatest hope was that the gallery would function as a collective, with artists that liked each other, respected each other, and made work that could be put in the same place together. And they'd be happy to see the friends that we were showing. And I think we've achieved that to some level, and this show represents that goal. And it's just been such a privilege over the last 2 years to get to know you really well, and to see the dialogue we're having right now. My wife Eva, I am married. People think it's an urban myth. Come say hi. Excuse us.
Oh, she cute, Russell.
All right, and I'm going to let these guys talk. And thanks again. Thanks, Russell. Thanks. Right. Great. Yeah. I love you. Just so you know.
It's so special to have you back in Boston. During parts of this year, I kept writing emails to Steve saying, even if the museum was closed, the apartments are available. Why don't you come? And there was no way to get over, so I'm so glad that he's finally decided to join us. It's so great.
Speak up with just a little time. Let's go.
We all want to hear.
Everybody come, everyone's going to get closer.
So, I mean, our adventure started together when I actually saw some of Steve's work at the ICA. This beautiful show that Ellen did some years ago. And then afterwards, because of that, I ended up going to see an early exhibition that Mass Arts was doing of older professors. And you had such an amazing work there that was focusing on the social issues, the things that were happening. Colored people that died.
Right.
And it was because of that work that I thought, oh, I really would love Steve to come because he would be such an amazing artist to have at the Gardner.
So she takes me out to lunch, right? We go to Stephanie's, right, in the South End.
All right.
And she says, like I've known her for like a long, like she's
5 minutes.
But you know, like her reputation is just so gigantic. You know what I mean? Working at the Blumenthal Festival and like all this sort of stuff, and all the artists that she's championed. She did the Sophie Calle show and like all this sort of stuff. Right? So I get to have lunch with her, right? And so and we're sitting there, and she says like, "So what do you think of the Gardner?" I go, "Oh, the Gardner! Wow." When I was at BU, we used to get stoned. Sit in the courtyard for an hour. We completely lost, and I'm telling her all this, right? And she's like, oh, that's a nice. So I run the artist residency program at the Gardner, and I was wondering if you would want to come. And I was like, I just told this woman that the Gardner is the site of my adolescent drug use, and she's inviting me. So that's the rest of the story. But she's too polite to tell.
Artists should be free to be able to explore things in the ways they want to. And Steve has just become a family member of the Gardner, basically, to the extent that now he's a trustee.
Yeah.
Fantastic. It's super fantastic, especially for the museum.
Yes.
It'll bring amazing voice.
To be an artist who's involved in a museum at a time when museums are being so challenged, that's a good way to put it, right? And to say like the voice of the artist is equal to the voice of the other people at the table, it's important. Do you mind?
So it was amazing when Steve made this amazing, incredible piece for Gray's memorial for Freddie Gray, Freddie Gray, and it was so moving. And I thought, and also during your time there, you really grew to be fascinated with the textiles and understand how textiles can tell particular stories. I So I thought maybe you could speak a little bit about that, both how you were thinking in terms of textiles, and then this use of color, this way of just taking an abstract form and giving it a person, making it connected to the identity of the human being. It's magnificent job, and that connects beautifully with this work.
Well, it was so weird to be at the Gardner at that particular time because it was like I said before, like you could turn on the television and see black people being exterminated. Like it was. I still can't get my brain around it, and it felt to me like it would be irresponsible to not talk about that, but also to find a way to talk about that wasn't like. Whitfield Lavelle is one of my mentors, right? And I was talking to him about the Freddie Gray project, and he said, you have to do it, but it can't be bad. Like, whatever you do, it cannot be bad. And so you have to be really, really ruthless with yourself. And working through the imagery, I didn't want to put an image of a person. I didn't want to put an image of a suffering person on the side of the museum, because that's the easy thing to do. Like, oh, look at my suffering, look at how pathetic we are, look at all this sort of stuff. And so I really was walking through the long gallery and watching the way the light was coming through the windows on one side of the space. And I thought, well, it has to be light. Like, it has to be something to do with light. Like, I can't figure out how to put light on the side of the building. And I thought, oh, stupid color is light, so just figure it out, right? And then thinking about color, like his name was Freddie Gray. Like, what color is that? And the quest to find that color, and then it was really weird.
The Rice Garden.
Right. The one that it's in Canada, 3 Deliberate Grays for Jasper Johns, right? Living with that painting, and then him trying to respond to the greatness of Jasper John, and me trying to respond to the loss of someone I didn't even know. But because that loss happened on our televisions over and over again, we all knew him, right? And so that sort of dialogue happened, and using the contemporary tools of Photoshop and all that sort of stuff, getting color, and then mixing the color, and then going to Benjamin Moore and having them make paint, and like all that sort of stuff. And then you, me, and Tiffany, like looking at the samples on the, Tiffany York was the coordinator of the Visiting Artist Program, just a wonderful human being, right? Like, looking at the colors in the office and being like, that's not the right color, and like, we have to redo it, and like, all that sort of labor that went into it, right? And it was this sort of group quest to get it right. Because like Whitfield said, it can't be bad. It can't be, right? So then when it went up on the side of the building, it was like looking at ice cream on the side of the building. It was like, and people were like, oh, it's this really beautiful thing, it's this really great image, and then they came into the museum and found out what it was about. It was like being hit in the stomach. And that's what life is like in America. That's what it is right now. It's not good or bad, it's not right or wrong, it's both at the same time. Yeah. And that's what it means to be American, is that we have this terrible shared history, and we have this amazing country. Like, both of those things are true at the same time. And I don't know why that's hard for people to hold in their heads, but it's really hard right now.
Well, that work was incredible work. It's meant a lot to the museum. Really helped people think things.
And I have to say that the museum was completely open to it. Yeah. And a lot of people would not have been open to like having work about that and this is before, like, I don't want to say anything bad. This is before there were all these sort of murals of imaginary black people around the city. This is before that, I don't mean to be horrible, but black people can't fly. Like, we're not magic, like, that's not true. And so when you see these images of us, like, flying through the air and all this sort of shit that are supposed to, like, glorify, like, no, like, black people go to the grocery store, they get headaches, they eat sushi, they do all the same shit. Right? And so, like, it was an image about reality. Like, and abstract things are just as real. It's just as real as what's going on right now between them.
This was a beautiful example of changing the way one thought thinks of abstraction, bringing content into abstraction.
Right.
And emotional.
But you know as well as I do, like the sort of like the idea that, coming from Art de Povera, that like this form has meaning, Like, you can't just make a form and say, oh, this form is neutral. Oh, that's insane, right? And so, like, an auction block is neutral in some extent because it's just a place for exchange. But it's also not neutral at all, right? And if that's the basic form of, like, you have America because you had chattel slavery. That's why we have a country. You had 300 years of free labor, cotton, export, all that sort of stuff. That's why we have a country. The wealthiest country in the world, and all that labor was uncompensated. So that's the central fact. Like, I'm not saying that's good, bad, or right, or wrong. That's just the fact, right? So if that's the way it is, like, I live in a beautiful country, right? And people have said, like, oh, you're being critical of Albers, and you're doing, I'm not being critical of Albers. I love Albers. Albers is no different than me. Albers is, he's a refugee. Like, he became an American. He integrated Black Mountain College. Right, so, like, I'm not in conversation with him.
He just got out in time.
Right, he did here and to rescue his life, right? And so that kind of thing, like that notion that somehow he's different than me, or that his story is not my story, like that's insane. That's the American story, that's my story. Right, so why wouldn't I be in dialogue with him?
And this is your example.
Yeah.
From above,
Yeah, because it started out for the Faneuil Hall project, because I was working with my team, Patty Seitz and Julian Phillips. We were working on making this object in plan view, and I had all these drawings, and like we try to do this public monument, so I had like the sewer maps and like the road and the underground of Faneuil Hall, and like layering all these things on top of each other because we were going to put like a half-ton bronze plate on top of it.
that was heated.
That was heated to the temperature of the body, and you know, it was really like I haven't been back since that project sort of went, and
I actually think it's a tragedy that it is.
I lost.
Yeah,
Sure.
travesty.
don't stop. Whenever I'm about to cry, I start singing Journey songs. So yeah, and but you know, I want to say that people in this room and like people like Joyce Linehan who had my back for that entire thing, who were so instrumental in getting it as far as it got. And I'm really proud of how far it got, right? But we were building it, we were constantly looking at it in plan view. And then I thought, what? Because you know, you draw something in plan view, but then you put it up on the wall to look at it. And so it's almost like you're looking up and down at the same time. And then because I was working on a square piece of paper, I thought like, oh, this kind of looks like an Albers painting. And then I went back and started researching all the Albers. There's a wonderful book on Albers called To Open Eyes, which is his curriculum, and I use it for my teaching. And I was looking at the assignments from Black Mountain College, and that's how the whole thing started. So I made a bunch of small ones that Del Hamilton
Really
was.
interested in the process.
Right. And that like it's about finding a form. It's not about depicting a form. It's about finding it within a rectangle. And then Del Hamilton had a bunch of those, you know, the original paintings in that show at Harvard. And Russell has a couple of them here. And then they went from that to a rectangular plan-based form to a much more pictorial language that comes directly from the numbers.
And it's, I was looking at the numbers, it's 80.
That's 81. That's a lot of them.
Yeah. But it's over a period of long period of time.
Yeah, it started in, I don't know when it started. I don't know when it started. This sounds like a Law and Order episode. Like, I don't know when it started. But I think...
And the tension has shifted also.
Yeah, because that's the pandemic. That's a lot of that stuff. And like what you have available, what colors you can get, when things can get delivered, and you know,
Also the boundary that can lines is different.
but you know, in the beginning I was taping everything off and painting it, right? And then, you know, the more I studied Albers, the more I realized first of all, he used a palette knife and oil paint, so, you know, yeah, good luck with that, Joe. Yeah. I tried that and it didn't go so well. His father was a carpenter and was a house painter. And so he taught him how to paint like a door from the inside out, so you don't need to paint on yourself, right? And I just failed. So I just started painting things flat with a brush. and I stopped taping things so the lines started to meet in this really human sort of way. Yeah, well, I mean, we were all separated, you know, and everybody was trying to come together, but we couldn't do it because of like COVID or because of restrictions or whatever. And so the way the lines come together in the paintings mimics the sort of the way that we are. Like you can't predict that, right? And sometimes you're following what you think is the line, and it's not the line at all, and then you end up making something that looks like a square but isn't a square. But I mean, it's endlessly fun to do. I'm up to like 100. Like it's endlessly fun. Like I never get tired of doing this.
And I was
Which is
looking at
kind
the
of
book
weird.
earlier, and that's an amazing book.
The book that was designed by Liz Morlock, who's here somewhere. Elizabeth Morlock, yeah. Fantastic, incredible book designer that I got to work with, which I'm really, really happy about. Yeah. And she, Liz would be like, you know, I think we should put these two paintings together. And I'm like, I don't really like that, Liz. She goes, yeah, we're going to put these two paintings together.
But I love how she captured your precision
Yeah.
in the way she managed the text.
And she did this thing where she has like, the book sort of builds to a crescendo. It starts out with like some sort of schematic imagery at the beginning and the essays by the incredible Lynn Tillman, who I'm so grateful wrote the essay for the book. But then as they get to the higher number of paintings, you can just feel like the weight of them starts to get heavier and heavier and heavier. So she did a great job. If anyone needs a book design, that's who you go to.
I have a question. How did you decide that size? That must have been such a good
Oh, the book, Liz? Really? I can't lie. She's like, it's going to be this big. And I'm like, okay. Yeah. Yeah, well, I mean, she knows and I don't. You know, I mean, she knew what the book would be like. When, like, it's, like, I have like like what was Liam Neeson say? I have a very specific set of skills. Yeah, like it's that kind of thing. And like some skills I don't have. Like I don't have that, so I have to rely on her. And it was you know the way she picked a typeface that didn't work out, and so she shifted to another typeface. She changed the positioning of all the text in the book, so it felt like you were looking at the paintings, and not that you were looking at like documentation or something. It really, the book really does mimic the experience of looking at the paintings as close as the book can do.
I thought you might also like to say something about the concept of the option block and how you were planning, you know, designing in France to actually be developed there.
Yeah.
Because I see it as a project that is ongoing and you will build it.
It's so weird because so many people are interested in that now, and it's just, I don't know if it's the time or if it was the fact that it failed so spectacularly here. I don't know, but a lot of people are interested in talking about it. And I swore I would never do another public project again because I was so destroyed by what happened here. A friend of mine sent me this email that the nation of France is building a memorial to enslaved people because France is the country has the third largest participation in the slave trade. And my team was like, you should try for it. And I was like, I don't think I should do it. I don't. And they're like, no, like it's a nation this time. Like it's not a municipality. Like it's an entire nation. And I was like, okay, so I'll do it. And so, we worked on it for we had a really, really short window of time to work through it. And it wasn't just a singular object, it's an entire plaza. And it's the Tuileries, which is, you know, France's front lawn, right, essentially, you know. And it's this triangular plot which mimics the transatlantic trade in triangular shapes. And so we designed this really incredible form that is this marriage of the side of a slave ship and the granite of Nantes, the slave port, coming together. It's on my website if you want to look at it, but we did it I'm really proud of it. And you know, France is so devastated by COVID right now, they can't address like that call for entry, so they have like sort of put a pause on the whole thing, but I'm hopeful. Like they didn't tell us no, so. And we're not like a huge, like me and 2 other people. It's not like a huge firm that is applying for this, and like all sorts of like big knuckleheads are applying for it. So I'm sure that someone else will get it, but it was just great to be able to apply for it and put my hat in the ring. So it made me a little less skittish about,
Try again.
yeah.
Good.
So, will you come back again?
Yeah. Well, you know, it's funny. Like my career started here. Like I think about like all the shows I had with Sampson across the street, and like Camilo Alvarez is like hanging over this entire exhibition. You know, like his vision and his support of the work. And I said to Russell, like, I know my work is weird. Like I know, like School of Love, Family Pictures, Rapture. Like I know, like I know that my work is weird. Like I don't have any problem with it, and I am not someone who ever expected anyone to be remotely interested in anyone I ever did, anything I ever did. I really, my hand to God, I never expected it. I just made the work that I felt like I had to make, and I always had a job, so I could feed myself, so I didn't have to like worry about selling paintings and stuff like that. And so the work is clear. The direction, the trajectory of the work has always been clear. I always look at people who are like, oh, I don't know what to paint. I'm like, well, I never had that problem. And I don't know anybody who is a real artist who does, to be honest.
Find a way.
You find a way because you have to make a way out of no way, because you have to work. Yeah. And the best thing about being in this show is like everybody in the show, I've known almost all these artists for a long time. They all work just as hard as I do. They're some of the hardest working artists in the country. And they're not fucking local artists. They're not. Like, cut that shit out. Right? Is Gerhard Richter a local German artist? No. Right? Like that. Like, you know, there's a way here that the great thing about people coming out, being in the community this way, is to support each other, to support the artists who work here, to support the people who support the institutions and all that sort of stuff. There's a lot of great stuff going on here. Right, and it doesn't make any sense to ignore it. It really doesn't.
And one last question. I was hoping you'd say something about the work that you're doing now with facades.
Oh, yeah. You know, I came back, I don't know if you folks have been to the Gardner since it's reopened, but they are redoing the Titian room. And I came back, one, to see Pieranna and to see the Gardner, but also Tess Fredette, who is the textiles conservator at the Gardner, who is
Amazing.
magnificent. She's a mass art grad. She's someone who knew that she was never going to be an artist, but she knew that she would be able to recapture the things that artists had done. And she has recreated Gardner's vision for that room, and it is exquisite. Looking at photographs and like tracing motifs and then matching motifs to what was popular back in the 18th century and like all sorts of crazy ass research, right? There's a great photograph of Tess and I laying on the floor of the conservation lab looking at the loom as she was like, right, she's trying to figure out the pattern that goes on one of the damask chairs in the salon. Like that's how intense her research is. And so I have been thinking about the way Gardner used tapestries as a way to capture light and surface, but also to capture information about a particular period. And in the Titian room, Tess told me that the most expensive thing in that time period was tulips. And when you look in the room, you see the tulip motif in all of the fabric. And for years, I thought that stuff was wallpaper. It's not. It's fabric. It's actual fabric. It's incredible. It's incredible.
And the colors are wild.
You can't. It's almost like being trapped in a Disney cell. The colors are so vibrant. And like all of the screening, the shades are down from the windows right now because they're hanging the room. So all this natural light is flooding in. So you really see the richness of the color, but you'll see like this portrait by Baroni is on one wall, and it's got this beautiful like sort of tulip finial in the frame, and that same motif is in the fabric behind it. And you see this throughout the room. It's spectacular. And so thinking about having a picture picture, like on a fabric, where the fabric is communicating some information about the picture, and the picture is in direct response to the fabric. And so I've been working on a series of tapestries that talk about comfort from our ancestors. Our ancestors like James Baldwin, and Shirley Chisholm, and Bayard Rustin. So I'm working on those kinds of things right now. And that's one of the reasons why I went to come back to the garden.
Maybe that.
Thank you.